Today we're talking grand pianos. From the baby grand to the concert grand, there's so many adjectives used today to describe the length of the instrument. Stick around because we're going to be listening to a 5-foot Kawai baby grand all the way up against the SD10 from Baldwin, a 9-foot concert series. Let's check it out.
Hi, this is Ted with Alamo Music Center in beautiful downtown San Antonio, Texas.
And I'm Patrick Marr. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channels, check out our other videos, sign up for notifications, like our videos, leave us comments. We really appreciate your support and we love to interact with you guys.
Great things today.
Great things.
Yeah, we're shooting in, I love shooting in this room, and I know the crew doesn't like it. I like it because it's noisy and it's loud and you feel like you're in the middle of downtown.
We're here in downtown.
And a great topic, grand pianos.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I'm excited because we get to hear the SD10 in all its glory, kind of a very famous piano model, one of our favorites. We've talked about it before, but just an incredible instrument from Baldwin, not making the SD10 anymore, but American-made. The one we're playing is, I think, is a 1994, and just a great sounding instrument. And we're comparing it up against a brand new Kawai GL10, so it's going to be a very kind of contrasting of sounds and flavors, but really the purpose of this video is kind of to discuss what's the deal about piano sizes? What's the deal about grand pianos, and why are they called, parlor, concert, orchestra, conservatory, all petite baby grand, regular baby grand, classic baby grand? There's all these names that, and I loved it because I was making a list of all of them, writing them all down, and you're like, that's just marketing.
But one of my favorite things, though, is a spinet before the piano was ever invented was still like a grand piano. It was a grand harpsichord.
It was.
It was shaped like that, but it wasn't real big. Spinet just meant small one.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when pianos start getting manufactured, they start making uprights. For a long time, they were uprights, and it was never really called a spinet until someone realized that's the smallest upright piano ever made. So it's like a spinet harpsichord, the smallest one made. And some of those were weird. They were just like this big, and they were like tabletops. And some of the other ones, I can't remember what they used to call them. There was an Italian instrument that only had like 1.5 octaves, and it was a real small one.
Yeah, no. Apparently, Cristofori, before he ever invented the piano, was working with these, like, they were called like spinet. Yeah, like basically a variation of spinet, but like they were tabletop instruments. And
those were supposedly to be like gift instruments that you would give to someone so that would introduce them to music, and so they could begin to learn how to put melodies and scales. And a lot of musicians used to use those to sing with, just like a 1.5 or 2 octave harpsichord.
And so that was all the way back at the end of the 17th century. Then early 18th century, you get the invention of the piano, Cristofori. I think it was like early 1700s. And then, it took a while to catch on, but then you kind of hit forte pianos right there, and a lot of classical music was written on forte piano.
What's really interesting is that they were never really called grand pianos, because the name, first they were the forte pianos. So it's just like, for the most part, a regular piano like you know it today without any pedals. And then
leather hammers, straight strings,
different tones,
85 notes sometimes less.
Probably made out of questionable materials. And by questionable, I mean they didn't know that spruce trees that are growing at 1,000+ feet above sea level produce the bass sound. I mean, they were putting all kind of things in.
Well, some of them you saw with like mahogany soundboards and just different wood types.
Even the size, they didn't think about reinforcing it with an iron frame until later on. And at first it was iron bars, but they were all in the grand shape or a big box shape. And
it had to be long because the bass strings had to sustain the bass note.
Yeah, the idea behind a straight strung piano is that when you look at it, it literally is a harp laying down with hammers that come up and hit it. That's really what it looks like when you look at a straight strung piano. And Beethoven had all straight strung pianos. And I'm not real sure. I think the what do they call it? The overstrung grand is about a 1850.
Yeah, it's basically right in the 1860s when piano kind of started to really change and catch on.
that's the time era that I call the perfection of the piano. And by that, it's pretty much the design to where most of the manufacturers got in. It's like, look, there's no way around it. You have to have a cast iron plate. You have to do certain things with the soundboard. And if you don't build a big enough rim, it won't support the plate. So the sides and it has to match the cast iron and all these other, the plate and all those kind of things. So that really started like around, I'd say around 1840 to around 1860, the piano got really, really sharply focused.
And and sizing wise, there wasn't a lot of options. It was everything was
were
over.
All big.
Yeah, they were
Every
all
one of them was
at
big.
least over 7 feet.
Right.
It was really to be played in, in a concert hall or to be played in, in a very nice place.
Well, yeah, too. And the other thing is that just as the piano was starting to be accepted and commonplace where you would see it a lot, the number one kind of music that was played everywhere in the country was marching band and circus music. And so if you ever tried to put a piano with a marching band, they get drowned out. And so that the orchestras was a good match for the piano.
Strings.
Right, because it was better than a harpsichord because you could hear it. A harpsichord sounded like a little tiny toy music box compared to an orchestra at the back of the opera house. A couple hundred years ago, when you put a piano in there, it's like putting the percussionist on it. It's turning the piano immediately into the sound of a snare drum with a note that rings on it. And
it's like a lead part.
It's percussive. And that was the one thing about a harpsichord is it didn't really have a percussive. I mean, even if you playing block chords on a harpsichord, when you listen to it in rock songs, when they put it in there, it sounds like someone picking a guitar, ding, 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 and not even strumming it, just hitting it. And remember, they're plucked. So it's like having,
great that all digital pianos nowadays come with the harpsichord. They come with like at least 2 harpsichord
it's really
sounds.
Neat.
It's like, I'm going to play with this for 10 seconds. It's already annoying.
Well, okay, now, but the beauty of the harpsichord sound for me in a digital instrument is that you can mix it with strings and you can get them balanced. So we're already talking about digitals and we started off on grand pianos. We haven't even gotten to the invention of a miniature grand piano yet. And so that shows up like around the turn of the century.
Yeah, early 1900s. I think 1905 to 1909 was right when Steinway was, they made their Model A, which is a very famous Steinway model. Nowadays, the Model A is 6'2". Back then, it was a 6-foot piano. So really much more manageable for a house, for a space, and was considered the baby grand piano until later when they update and get the Model O, which is in the teens, 19s. I think it was 1913.
Like a 5'8"? Is that 5'7"?
No, it's a 5'10".
Okay.
Is the O in some change, and then eventually they did have the M come out, which is the one that's about the 5'8" to 5'7", and then the S came in the 30s, and the S was the small baby grand. They say the S stands for small. And so that was really kind of, and I think at every point when they released something like that, there was other manufacturers immediately were like, oh, we can do this too. And it's interesting because a lot of piano technology today, and fast forwarding, but it's all the improvement of those smaller models that became popular. And there's been so many. You look at the patents on some of these instruments, and they're really proud of them. They put them on the plate.
Yeah, the patents are there, but interesting thing is on Piano Row in the 20s, where Steinway factory was, and I'm trying to remember the other factories that were down there. There were like 4 or 5 that were along the same street. And that is when, in the 20s, when you started getting different kind of small grand pianos. By the time after the teens, you had Mason and Hammond and Baldwin. They all followed suit for making different sized grand pianos. But during the 20s, you start seeing the butterfly pianos that open up. In the 20s and 30s, you start seeing different manufacturers doing different things. But the reason why I mentioned Piano Row is not all those workers and contractors were exclusive for Steinway.
They just walk right to the next job.
They would walk across the next job where they had some other factories. And it's like, hey, this is patented over there, but we can do it here. And so you see a lot of similarities in a lot of the pianos, but any piano that was manufactured along Piano Row in the 20s is a really good set of steel, and wood frame and all that kind of stuff. And it's not going to be super, super fancy. Some of them were, but you can get these unique, one-of-a-kind, kind of oddly shaped pianos that come out of the 20s, and by the mid-30s, they're gone.
Well, and it's. I think this is kind of where some of those names start getting sprinkled in too, because for the longest time it was if you needed a piano from the home, it was an upright, of course, and that was the only thing that was going to fit. But then when they started making the smaller sized pianos and getting materials, figuring out how to get a parlor grand, it would go into the bigger house with the parlor in the front, and there was room to have an entertainment room with a smaller piano at this point.
Piano there.
And fast forward now, what's the most common thing people ask for is I want a baby grand. I got room for a baby grand at my house. Even if they're thinking of a bigger piano, they use the word baby grand because it's so synonymous with this shape of instrument.
The shape of a piano.
And it's baby, I feel like, is like a cute term for it, right?
Well, see, here's the idea. A baby grand piano can be anywhere from about there was one that was made right around 4 feet, right under 4 feet, and that is probably going to sound worse than a Spinet, I would imagine.
Well, the petite baby grands, they don't even really.
Kimball made those. Those were not bad sounding. The only thing about that particular model, and they sold a lot of them, the La Petite, is that the lid was always closed, and the music desk was built on top of it.
Oh, interesting.
So it was like an always closed up piano. You couldn't lift it and look at the strings inside. A tuner would have to come over and take screws out of it.
Oh, wow.
To get the half to fold back. That was the only thing about it, and I don't know why they did that, because I think that prohibited more people from wanting that instrument, but it was one of the most affordable ones. And the reason why I mention them is because that 4'7" La Petite was smaller than anything Steinway ever built. And supposedly the term baby grand comes up from whoever marketed the smallest piano first. And see, each manufacturer has a different concert grand. For the most part, the Steinway and the Baldwin are 9 foot. The Yamaha at this time, I think, is probably 9'2" or something.
9'1", I think.
1.
Yeah, they're all like.
The Kawai's a little hair over, and actually the Steinway and the Baldwin are actually a quarter or half inch shorter than 9 foot.
Yeah, it's all
just easier to say 9-footers. But Mason and Hamlin made a CC, which is 10'6", I think, and then Bosendorfer has the 11-footer with the extra keys.
They're huge.
So since there's no set size for the biggest concert grand, there really is no set size for the smallest baby grand.
They can kind of name what they want.
Name what they want, and then you mentioned parlor grand, which was one of my favorites, because a parlor grand, when someone says, "Oh, what's that?" "Oh, it's just like a chamber grand." "Oh, what's that?" Well, it's like you said, all these different adjectives.
Or a semi-concert.
Or a semi-concert grand, or a medium concert, or the Chickering.
Classic grand.
Home grand, or classic grand, or performance grand.
Recital.
Or artist grand. Recital grand. And so all they're really doing is, you have to remember, there's a lot of different manufacturers, and they all make maybe 5 or 6 different kind of grand pianos, and they all have their own marketing plan. But since since like the turn of the century, 1900, they've all been imagining, manufacturing, marketing, and publicizing these names of these pianos.
And saying this is the way it is.
This is the way it is.
And
a parlor grand is great for a small orchestral. A chamber grand is great as long as you don't have more than 12 or 14 or 16 string players, whatever it is.
Well, I think with that being said, let's hear a concert grand versus a baby grand.
Yeah, I tried to play the same thing on both of them. I just played an introductory passage, and then I played another little melodic thing.
Okay, yeah, let's take a listen to them and talk about what makes each of these very special. But Ted, to me, it's always interesting to hear how different two pianos can be. And of course, the sizing of these instruments is the biggest difference. But what are the things that make modern baby grands sound full? And as you move up in size, what changes? Scale, you hear terms like scale design changes, of course, string length changes, the thickness of the rim changes. There's all these features that as you move up, of course, the manufacturer is going to spend a little bit more money producing. But what are the things that make today's baby grand specials? And as you move up in the line, what makes it special?
Here's the fascinating thing is that today's baby grand piano, for example, we'll just talk about this Kawai. What makes this so special is that, well, 100 years ago, they didn't make this kind of instrument, okay? But at the same time, features that are normally found in the more expensive and larger concert grand pianos are in almost any size grand piano that you want to get in this day.
It's officially trickled down, basically.
Including the concept of the baby grand. And the other thing that has changed, again, is the quality and the type of raw materials and technological materials that they're putting into the pianos. Now, yes, piano strings and piano wire, and the way and the manner in which those bass strings are wrapped is entirely different. At one time, it was done by hand. And so now it's done by machine. These things, the precision of the manufacturing of the parts is a lot much better than what it used to be by hand. And particularly in the case of the Kawai, it's got a carbon fiber action in it.
Yeah, the Millennium 3.
The Millennium 3 action in it, which means this small baby grand piano plays 100 times better than any concert grand piano that's more than 20 some odd years old, unless it's been super
meticulously changed.
Up.
Souped up.
Yeah, so as part of the research and with the invention of the baby grand piano also came the innovations to find out, are these strings fat enough? Can we use the same kind of strings? Do they had to design a string that was for a 5'8" or a 5 foot or a 4'7" piano? So every manufacturer had to do their own R&D and do the best that they could to come up. That's why they named a lot of these products with a different kind of series, a parlor grand or chamber grand. And so, and the other thing too is that as the manufacturing process increased, they got much better and highly focused, and this is particularly true after World War II, because this country was on a manufacturing craze after that. And so after that, we went back to making consumer materials. And in the piano industry, you see it right away. Because if you had, say, a piano from the 20s that was, say, a 7-foot grand, and then you had one that was made in the late 40s, and it was a 5.5 or a 6-foot grand, well, the newer piano was always going to sound better than the older one. It was going to play better, the action was going to be better, and that was something that was going to be more exciting to the player, to have that snap and that expression.
And to you, is there a size that like resonates with you? Because to me, there's always like, with scale design, with manufacturers, I feel like there's different points in manufacturers' line where you're like, oh wow, like the Mason Hamlin Model A, for example, is always talked about as like one of the best baby grands because of the scale design, because of the resonator underneath, because of all these things that come together perfectly for Mason right there, and at the attainable price point. And people will say this is the best sounding baby grand out there.
That's probably one of the top ones out there.
And so, and there's, I believe the KG series for Kawai was this as well. So that that 5'11" size for Kawai is really a shining spot. And so the modern GX2 kind of lives on what the KG2 did. The C3 from Yamaha is talked about as that 6'1", and it kind of just shines. And I don't know if it's what we're comfortable listening to, like what our ears have adapted to, or if it's really kind of a bright spot for the manufacturer.
It's a bright spot for the manufacturer when you get around the 7-foot mark. You can make accommodations to go lesser than that, and they show up. When you play a 4'7" grand piano, you're listening to a compromised scale being crunched into a smaller, just like when you're playing a spinet. Yeah, it's a piano, you can practice on, you can learn on it, but it's not anything you want to go and perform in front of the world on. A 9-foot is actually an exaggeration of the 7-foot because it has longer strings, more soundboard, so it has more power. It's perfect for performing on. I wouldn't like to have one in my house to play on every day.
Yeah.
It's just too much.
Overpowers.
Yeah, to me, my dream instrument, the one that you go to all the time and you record with, you write, all you do is a 7-foot grand piano. And I have certain models that I like that are right around there.
Yeah.
And my favorite pianos are not any of the big selling models. I mean, the ones that I like are the off.
Yeah, you can sometimes find a gem, and it's just interesting to really kind of look at both of these behind us and do the exaggeration of the 5-foot versus the 9-foot,
right.
Almost a double in size. But it is interesting because sound quality and the dynamics of the instrument aren't everything. And like you had talked about, the Millennium 3 action is probably a better action than on old Baldwin.
And the other thing too we didn't talk about is aesthetics. And see, you just don't put a grand piano in your house. It has to match your furniture. It's got to be contemporary. It's got to be old. And they come in all different shapes, sizes, and colors and appearances. Sometimes when you get a returning player that grew up on a grand piano, they want a grand piano, but they don't want 3 legs. They want a helping still. They want 6 legs. They want the double legs because it looks like a serving buffet or something. It matches their furniture.
Yeah, it's almost like there's different reasons to buy different instruments, and that's why there's a whole room of them, right?
Right.
But it's very fun to sit here and listen to baby grand piano all the way up to concert grand. And really, it's unique because we have a lot of fun being able to play, the 5-foot pianos, the 6-foot pianos, the 7-foot pianos, and then it kind of just jumps up to 9-foot, right after about 7.5 feet. But there's lots of different names, and so it can get very confusing. But we just thought we'd do a fun video, kind of talking about the overall arch of grand pianos from kind of inception to at a time the 9-foot piano was like, this is the thing I want the most, or if I'm the best pianist.
There was sometimes if you weren't playing on a 9-foot piano, you weren't playing the piano.
But it is incredible how many people pick 7-foot to 7.6 now as like, that's what I want. And it's a great instrument. Well, thank you guys for watching. If you've had the opportunity to play any size of grand piano and you prefer one over the other, please leave a comment. Let people know, this is my favorite because X, Y, or Z. I'm sure people would love to hear your stories. And we love doing videos like this. This is Ted. I'm Patrick with Alamo Music Center. Thank you guys for watching.